The 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. Maybe you remember working on a book report or something from elementary school. I know I do, where you had to answer the 5 W's. And I know journalists are always making sure that the beginning of their story gets to the 5 W's to explain why a story is relevant and important. I want to apply that to talk about copyright registration, the 5 W's of copyright registration. Who can register a copyright? Well, the simple answer is the owner of the copyright, but that can be more complicated than it seems, particularly if there's an employment relationship or other contractual relationships. So the author of the work is not always the owner of the work, and it is the owner of the work who generally would register a copyright. What is a copyright registration? A copyright registration is a certificate. You can see here if you're watching the video on YouTube at ericpelton.tv, a certificate issued by the Library of Congress that contains all the details of the copyright and describes the deposit of the actual work that is submitted to the Library of Congress in order to obtain that registration. Now, when the Library of Congress reviews a copyright application, they don't do the same kind of in-depth substantive review that the Patent and Trademark Office does for a patent filing or a trademark filing. It's more of an administrative review. And if ever there is a dispute about the copyright involving the registration, then a court would dig in more to the substance. When to register a copyright? Well, there's no timing requirement, but it is generally important to register relatively soon because you can only assert statutory damages in a claim in court if the copyright is registered or pending. It's always advantageous to do these things sooner rather than later. You could always go back if the work is evolving or changing and file a new copyright for the updated versions in the future. This is, for example, for a website or for a book that may have subsequent editions. You can re-register the updated editions later on in the future. Where does one register a copyright? Well, I mentioned the Library of Congress. They're housed just down the road here in Washington, D.C. The Library of Congress hosts the Copyright Office. You can find a lot more information about that at copyright.gov. That is where copyrights are registered. Why would one want to register a copyright? The answer, much like protection and registration for other intellectual properties, is that it helps to deal with copycats, with infringers. Having a registration makes a much stronger claim, a much stronger threat or letter when you're trying to get someone who might be copying it to stop and to take it down. And the reason is because it gives the owner rights and the ability to sue in court and collect more money, and therefore that makes the threat that much more intimidating. At Eric M. Pelton and Associates, you know we like to practice what we preach. So we recently and proudly became the owners of copyright registration for the Building a Bold Brand book. And I've shared some of the details here with the registration certificate so you can see what goes into that. Again, it's on its face somewhat simple to answer the questions and fill out the fields in the form, but there's a lot of nuance as to how the work is described, what gets deposited, the ownership and authorship questions, and things are never quite as simple as they seem when it comes to intellectual property. So I hope you've enjoyed learning about the 5 W's of copyright registration. If you have a question about registering or protecting your copyrights, please connect with us at ericpelton.com.